Well, greetings in everybody, and excuse me. All right. Well, welcome. My name is Lincoln Snyder, and I am President and CEO of the National Catholic Educational Association. And we're here today for our 2022-2023 Catholic School Enrollment Update. So this is our annual census and data collection that we do on behalf of our member schools. So we have a lot of good news to share with you today. I am joined on this Zoom today with Dr. Julie Vogel, who is our Chief Content Officer, our VP of Research and Data, Annie Smith, and Data Analyst, Sarah Huber, so from our data and research team. So a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box during this, and my colleagues will read the questions at the end, and either Annie, Julie, and I will field those questions for you gladly at the end of the presentation. And as always, we are going to begin in prayer. And so I'd like to invite Annie Smith to offer a prayer for us today.
In Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Lord our God, in your wisdom and in love, you surround us with the mysteries of the universe. Send your spirit upon all our students and teachers and leaders and fill them with your wisdom and blessings. Grant that our students may devote themselves to their studies and draw ever closer to you, the source of all knowledge. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
Thank you, Annie. So NCEA, your Association for Catholic Schools, does conduct an annual census of our schools. And so what I'm going to be talking today is about the outcomes of that data collection that we've done. A bit on process. So data is reported to schools, to their diocesan offices, who then report it to us, NCEA. And so we aggregate that data. For the first time, we did request school level data that also migrated up to us as well. So the data that we've collected and the numbers we're going to be sharing are a snapshot as of the state of Catholic schools as of September 16th, 2022. So this reflects where we were at in the fall when the numbers were reported. So the important news for today is this: for the second year in a row, Catholic school enrollment has grown. So we're very pleased to report that we are in our second year of growth as a Catholic school system, which is a real point of celebration for us. We saw a big jump post-COVID of a 3.8% increase last year. The growth was not as steep this year. We're up 0.3% nationally. So that means we now have 1.693 million kids and 5,920 schools. That 0.3% gain still represents around 5,000 students that are newly added to our enrollment in our schools. So and we would like to congratulate the members for working so hard to achieve these numbers. We saw a big jump in Catholic school enrollment post-pandemic. Of course, the hope was that we would be able to retain those new friends that have joined us in our schools, and our data shows that that is indeed the case. The families came, they have stayed, and continue to join us. So within this data, we wanted to draw your attention to a few other points. So at 39.2% of our schools have a wait list, and this is also good news. So we're seeing that the schools that at least one class have a wait list for students. So this means that demand is strong across a high percentage of our schools. And the other good news is that both our elementary and secondary schools saw growth across the system. So this was a general increase in enrollment. Of course, we saw a bigger net gain in enrollment for our elementary schools this past fall. This year, we've seen both elementary schools and secondary schools up. So this is growth across all schools, school levels within the system. Another point of good news for us is that early childhood enrollment is now higher than it was pre-pandemic. So specifically, we're seeing greater pre-kindergarten enrollment in our schools than we saw pre-pandemic. So we saw a big gain last year, 32.2% growth in early childhood enrollment. It's up again by 3.8%. So we're seeing our greatest growth over the last 2 years in that area. And another bright spot for us. So we've seen the fewest Catholic school closures or consolidations in the last 2 decades this past year. So what do we mean by that? In this past year, 44 schools closed and 8 of them opened. So another point of concern was we saw a big spike in closures during the pandemic, right at the onset of the pandemic, where perhaps some closures were accelerated. The hope was that would mean fewer closures coming out of the pandemic, especially given our growth in enrollment. And that is indeed the case. So again, the smallest number of closures we've seen in the last 2 decades. Excuse me. So within this data, and this is a very important trend to know, where the US population has grown, Catholic school enrollment has grown. This pandemic saw high levels of internal migration within the United States. Some regions of the country grew faster than others as people relocated for jobs or other reasons during and following this pandemic, and we've seen growth in those areas. So looking at this chart, we have seen our greatest percentage change in students from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic in the Southeast. That's the area that's experienced the most overall growth. We have seen our greatest drop in the number of students in the Mid-Eastern states. And so these changes, we believe, reflect changes in overall population and internal migration during this pandemic and as a consequence of all the changes that COVID-19 has brought us. So some trends within schools that we also think reinforce this growth. We know that Catholic schools are expanding their offerings in recent years to better meet the needs of our families. And what do we mean by this? We're seeing a great diversification of programs within Catholic schools. For example, we now have 99 schools that are offering international baccalaureate programs. We have seen 125 schools report that they have dual language immersion programs in which students are receiving instruction both in English and in a target language, the most common language being Spanish. We've also seen an uptick in virtual schools. So we have at least 7 schools nationally reporting that they are virtual, and that gives us an opportunity to serve students who otherwise wouldn't have access to an in-person Catholic education. And finally, we saw a big change in the number of international students with visas, or on student visa programs, but we still have 5,000 students in our Catholic schools on international visas. 79% of those were in secondary schools. So a big change in those numbers, but those are not programs that have gone away completely for Catholic schools. So another big development of recent years, we've continued to see growth in parental choice programs at the state level, and we see families and schools enjoying more and more students accessing those choice programs within the schools. So what do we mean by this? We know that at least 10% of our Catholic school students are using a parental choice program as part of their being at the school. And we know that at least 27.6% of our schools have families in that school enjoying the benefit of a parental choice program. Our single biggest percentage of participation in these programs is in the state of Arizona. 95% of our schools have students that are there enjoying a choice program. 73.8% of the students in Arizona are taking advantage of that choice program. So we see a correlation between families having access to choice programs and their ability to provide their child or choose a Catholic education rather for their child. Our Catholic schools are also serving an increasingly diverse population. So in the course of the last decade, we've seen our percentage of Hispanic and or Latino students, as reported, increase from 14.3% to 19.3%. So steady growth. And we've seen growth recover following a drop during the pandemic, which is a bright spot within the data for us. Another big change for us over the last 50 years is that we have seen our percentage of non-Catholic students go from 4.7% to 22% today. So over 1/5 of our students in Catholic schools are non-Catholic families. We one of the big questions for our Catholic educators has been around retention. We saw record numbers of non-Catholic families choose Catholic schools during the pandemic. And the good news is these families have stayed. So I think this is a bright spot for the church to know that our schools continue to operate as authentically Catholic schools, and non-Catholic families are recognizing the excellence and are staying with us despite the fact that they have other options. So this is a real opportunity for us for evangelization and bringing more families into community. A few other spots about our diversity that I wanted to highlight today. One is the growth in the number of students that are reporting that they come from multiracial backgrounds. So this reflects changes in overall reporting within the United States, but we've seen that percentage of students grow from 2% to 9.2% over the last 2 decades. So in terms of overall gains, that's the single biggest growing self-reporting demographic of diverse students within our schools. We know that 15.2% of our students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. And so we serve a broad variety of learners within our Catholic school communities from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then finally, now 6.9% of our Catholic school students report to have special needs. And we see that number of students growing year on year, and we see our school leaders taking on creating more programs to make and other means of support to ensure that we are supporting those students within our schools. Finally, I just wanted to call back to some data that we shared earlier, but adds more context to this overall growth, which is the good news around how Catholic schools performed on this year's so-called Nations Report Card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So this is a study done in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Education. It surveys student academic performance in schools, both public and private. And in looking at our reading scores, we saw for 4th grade reading Catholic schools, if Catholic schools were a state, they would be the highest performing state in the nation. For math in 4th grade, again, if Catholic schools were a state, we would be the highest performing state in the nation for our 4th grade math results on the NAEP. For 8th grade, Catholic schools lead the field. And for 8th grade math, we also see Catholic schools leading the field. And within this data, as we disaggregate it too, we're very proud to say that we see our Catholic school students performing strongly in the NAEP outcomes across different demographics, male and female, race and ethnicity. We see our Catholic school students leading the way across a diverse sample of populations within the schools. And finally, and this speaks to our schools working very hard to accommodate all learners, Catholic school students eligible for a free or reduced price lunch also perform very strongly on the NAEP data. And it's important to note that this Catholic school advantage in terms of achievement academically on things like the NAEP are really reflective of our students being on pace to graduate from college, for example, in strong numbers. So we know that these differences at the elementary school level really are predictive of our kids being on a strong trajectory for their future academic growth. So again, to summarize, we're very pleased to report that our schools are up for the 2nd year in a row. We know we've got a number of questions, and so I am going to go to the discussion board. Okay, so first of all, we have a question. Will the slides be available? We do have a data report that we're going to be can share with our members in as a shareable copy. So if you don't have one, please reach out to us via email, and we will be happy to get a copy of the report to you. Question about a PD certificate available for this webinar. This was an informational webinar, but please reach out to us if you do have PD requirements. And Julie did share that the slides will be available. Annie did report that we will email a survey and receive a certificate. So thank you for answering that, Annie. And then sharing the great resource to use for our parent choice movement in New Mexico. Yes, so we know that many Catholic school leaders across the country are advocating for parental choice programs at their state level. We've seen states, more states adding parental choice through legislation. Obviously, we're very happy that the data we provide can serve as a resource for our members. Okay, the percentage of Catholic schools that participate in NAEP. I could not answer to the overall percentage. I can tell you that every year when it's conducted, the folks that administer the NAEP send out the questions or the invitation to participate to a randomized selection of schools, and the schools opt into participating in the NAEP. And I know enough Catholic schools participate in the NAEP that the statistics are valid. So they do report out Catholic school data because enough schools do participate for them to be confident in the data set. Okay. Yeah, Daryl, thank you for the shout out. Felicia, breakdown of academic performance of Catholic schools versus public school by state. Yeah, so when you provide that slide, it does show how Catholic schools performed in the aggregate versus U.S. public schools by state. So hoping that the NCEA might include data on male and female students. I don't believe we disaggregate everything according to male and female, but please reach out to our data team, Bonnie, and we'll see what we can get you. Lori, thank you for offering your email to include you. Lauren, have you seen enrollment growth more significantly in states with choice programs? Did Arizona school enrollment increase more significantly than other states? So as we look at the growth trends and change in population, Lauren, we do see a correlation between overall growth or changes in population and Catholic school growth. Of course, with well over 3/4 of our Catholic school students participating in choice programs in Arizona, we believe that, of course, must make Catholic schools an option for more families. And so, all things being even, we should enjoy higher enrollment in those states. And Tanya asked the question, is increase in non-Catholic students and families attending Catholic school leading to a dilution of Catholic identity? So our Catholic schools are accountable to bishops and religious orders and other stakeholders to make sure that the Catholic identity of the schools is strong. Most of our schools undergo an accreditation process that includes significant evaluation of things like Catholic identity, curriculum, and content. We're confident to say that our Catholic schools are teaching according to the beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church. And we view non-Catholic students coming into our schools a chance to educate broader communities about the Catholic Church and Catholic faith and Catholic intellectual tradition, rather than having the consequence of watering down the Catholic content. Anecdotally, we hear about reports of things coming out of the pandemic, like more families participating in church life in one form or another because of their participation in schools, but that's not something we measure as part of this survey. Yeah, John Reyes offered that we don't have enough schools to offer Catholic school breakout by states. This is true. And he says that we usually have around 70 to 75% participation in NAEP. Sister Elaine asks if the percentage of students eligible for free or reduced lunch, does that reflect a low enrollment of poor and maybe working class families? I will hand this question off to my colleague Annie Smith to see if we've had any more data within this. I will say that one of the segments of schools that's been affected most by our numbers the last 2 decades is urban schools. And so we've just done some reporting on that phenomenon. Annie, do you have anything to add to answer Sister's question? Oh, you're muted, Annie.
We've seen a slow increase in the percent of students who are eligible for free reduced price lunch. But again, it depends on if Catholic schools are reporting that. We don't have every single diocese reporting that. So we think that's a great underestimate of how many students in our schools who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch.
Thanks, Annie. Then the follow-up, are the birth rates in various geographic regions similar to rise or decline of students in Catholic schools? Have we done any correlative studies with birth rates? I don't believe we have.
Yeah, we've dug in a little bit by state and by birth rates, and you can see, as Lincoln mentioned earlier, just when you look at the migration trends, especially since COVID hit, our numbers correlate pretty well with where the U.S. population is going, is where we see increased enrollment in our Catholic schools.
Perfect. Thanks, Annie. So Felicia asked a question about academic performance. Is that based on state assessments? So the numbers we're providing are from a national assessment that is, it's considered the nation's report card because it's the same test with the same methodology across all states and territories and kinds of schools where it's administered. So it does allow for apples to apples comparisons. It's kids taking the same test everywhere. And then Timothy Cook asks, consider providing the annual enrollment statistical report as a downloadable report to members in the future. So happy to discuss that, Tim, as we roll out more publications in the future. Laura asks, we should see higher enrollment. Did we or do you not have it state by state? Annie, we do have data state by state. And so if you're curious to see the state numbers, we can provide those in subsequent reports. Okay, Rob Frey asks, are other states pursuing expansion of choice programs? And we have seen pursuit of expansion of choice across a number of states, including in Iowa and Utah having recently passed legislation. We know that there is legislation in the hopper in New Mexico. So yes, we are seeing more states consider and implement choice programs for students. So Annie, Jacqueline's question, would you like to take that one about what we do to disaggregate?
Yeah, so we have it disaggregated by both state and diocesan level. We go deeper in our data brief and our data book on that specific data. And as I said before, when we looked at by state, it was really clear that the Southeast region, where we have also seen the U.S. population go, has increased, and the Mideast has really been impacted. And then we do look at by diocese as well, so we can then learn from those dioceses where we've seen increased enrollment. What are those best practices, and how can we share that across the country?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sister Dale shares some information about NAEP not providing state data for public schools as a function of budget. Felicia asks about, do we compare this academic data to the programs used within the schools? And no, this NAEP does not look at the program. We don't get school specific data on the data we've presented here. Okay, Terry offers some feedback about plans in Florida of offering or considering universal choice education spending account. Adrian, we will make this data available. Jim asked about state-specific number. Charles asked about enrollment data by suburban, urban, and rural schools as a category. Annie, maybe add a comment about how we track according to school type.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, this year is the first year we collected school level data, and we've also partnered with Georgetown University, creating a longitudinal database of school level data so we can better track enrollment data by those regions. We don't share it here, but that's something that we're digging into. And so you can reach out to us, Charlie, so we can talk about it more.
Perfect. Lauren May, thank you for the question. Of course, I think I speak for membership in saying that the goal is to continue to grow. And so, thank you for that question. Tim Cook asked if the data briefs are new to the website. I just discovered them by accident. Annie, maybe you could speak to the data that we do have up on the website.
Yeah, we have, we've had those for a few years. And there's also, you can play around with through Tableau some of the data highlights, and we will be posting our data brief this year as well as the updated data. So that's been there for a few years under our, I think it's under like About Catholic Schools.
Perfect, thank you. Sarah asked the question, what have we learned from dioceses that have increased enrollment even when the region is down? What is successful? I know that we have some feedback or anecdotal data, or a lot of discussion on this point, Annie, but are there, and we identified some things immediately post-COVID, but is there any recent hard data that we can offer on this point? Bright spots and growth?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily hard data. We've just heard that our schools have really welcomed and attracted new families and then retained them. We've also seen where, instead of just focusing on, tuition, they really called up the families during COVID and said, how can we help you? How can we support you academically, spiritually? Do you need food for the table? And so by really welcoming them and kind of supporting the whole child and the whole community, that's where we've seen the most growth, I feel like, and retaining of the students.
Yeah, that's a great point, Annie. We've seen very high retention rates across our schools, and we've also seen a lot of growth in enrollment in those earliest grades, which means that we have a very strong potential for maintaining high numbers because those families stay with us for years or decades to come within the system. Yeah, so the data we presented was from NAEP and not NWEA. Do we have any other questions before we wrap this up? Excellent. Well, I think that we've gotten to all the questions that have been asked. So thank you for attending today. We're always available for follow-up questions. So my email is lsnyder@ncea.org. Feel free to reach out, or you can reach the rest of the team. Like I said, we're very pleased to be able to share this good news with you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you for your attendance today, and God bless.